Before we dive into methods, frameworks, or terminologies, let's pause for a moment and reflect on why research in development and security matters. Every data set represents real lives. Every locale carries histories, power relations, and human struggles. Every methodological decision we make, where we go, who we listen to, what we measure, shapes not just our findings, but the stories we let about communities, conflicts, and change. This lecture is not just about doing research correctly, it's about doing research responsibly, thoughtfully, and with humility. As scholars and practitioners in development, humanitarian action, and security, we are entrusted with translating complex realities into evidence that can inform policy, protect lives, and improve futures. What follows is a guide to making those choices with intention. And let's begin by grounding ourselves in the big picture. Allow me to share my slide for this afternoon's lecture. This opening slide introduces the overarching purpose of the presentation to provide a comprehensive guide for students working in development and humanitarian and security studies. It signals that the focus is not theory in isolation, but research design choices, specifically local units of study, sampling, and data collection that form the backbone of credible, ethical, and useful research. What's powerful here is the framing. By placing local and units alongside sampling and data collection, this slide emphasizes that methodology is not just about tools, but about contextual judgment. In development and security research, where environments may be fragile, politicized, or dangerous, these decisions carry higher stakes. Poorly designed research doesn't just weaken findings, it can misrepresent communities or exacerbate harm. This title invites us to think holistically, not mechanically, about research design. So, from the very start, we're being asked to think like intentional researchers, people who see methods as ethical and analytical commitments. With that framing in mind, the next slide zooms out further to show us how all these pieces fit together. So, this slide lays down the roadmap of the presentation in four parts: local and unit of the study, sampling techniques, data collection methods, and practical applications. It clarifies that the session will move from conceptual foundations to applied guidance, specially tailored to development and security contexts. The sequencing matters. By starting with local and units, the presentation reinforces that where research happens and what is being studied must be clarified before deciding who to sample or how to collect data. This is especially critical in security and humanitarian settings where access, power dynamics, and risk vary widely. The final emphasis on practical applications signals that this is not abstract methodology. It's meant to directly inform research proposals and planning. In short, this overview promises a coherent journey from foundational decisions to real world applications. With that map in mind, we now step into the first chapter, technically beginning with one of the most underestimated but powerful elements of research design: local. Local and unit of the study. This section introduces two core concepts, local and unit of the study. It frames them as answers to two deceptively simple questions. Where does your research happen? And what exactly are you examining? In many weak proposals, these questions are either vague or assumed. We challenge that tendency here. In development and security research, the local is never neutral and the unit of study is never accidental. A conflict affected village, an NGO office, or a peacemaking base all shape behavior, access, and meaning differently. Similarly, studying individuals versus programs versus institutions leads to fundamentally different analytical claims. This section sets the foundation for methodological clarity. By foregrounding local and unit early, the presentation signals that strong research begins with precision and self-awareness. Let's now unpack the first of these concepts more carefully by asking, what do we really mean by local? Understanding local in the research setting. We define local as the physical, social, and cultural environment in which research occurs. Crucially, it emphasizes that local is not just a backdrop, it actually shapes behavior, meaning, and what the researcher can ultimately discover. Examples range from development affected communities and NGO offices to conflict zones and peacekeeping bases. This framing pushes researchers to move beyond geographic labels. A community is not just a place on the map, it is a lived environment shaped by routines, hierarchies, histories, and constraints. In security research, for example, fear, surveillance, or militarization may influence what participants are willing to say. In development settings, dependency relationships or donor presence can shape responses. Understanding local means anticipating how context filters reality. So, local is not where research happens alone. It's part of how research works. Knowing that, the next slide helps translate this idea into practice by showing what a strong local description should actually include. So, writing your local section. This slide breaks the local section into three components: where the study takes place, why this site is appropriate, and what key features of the context may shape findings. It provides concrete prompts, such as specifying the exact setting and identifying relevant social, cultural, or institutional characteristics. What's important here is intentional justification. Researchers are not just describing a site, they are defending a methodological choice. Why this community and not another? Why this program, office, or operation? By identifying key contextual features like resource availability, cultural norms, or institutional routines, the researcher signals awareness of how these factors might influence data. This strengthens credibility and anticipates reviewer concerns. A strong local section does more than orient the reader. It builds trust in the researcher's judgment. With that foundation, we now turn to how local plays out differently depending on research paradigms, starting with qualitative research. Local in qualitative research. Context matters. We need to explain that in qualitative research, or we need to explain that qualitative research occurs in natural settings where context is central rather than controlled. Researchers enter participants' worlds, communities, NGOs, or affected areas to understand how meaning is constructed. Ethnography is highlighted as an approach that explicitly treats context as inseparable from interpretation. In qualitative development and security research, the researcher is the instrument. This means that what you observe, hear, and interpret is shaped by the environment you enter. Being explicit about both participants and site is not optional. It is methodological honesty. A refugee camp, a post-conflict village, or a peacekeeping operation carries distinct power dynamics that shape narratives. Rich local description prepares readers to interpret findings with appropriate nuance. At this point, we can we can now look at, so at this point we have only looked at research per se and have understood the dynamics that is involved. We see where it leans into. As we move forward, we'll contrast this with how quantitative research approaches local differently, especially when validity and control become central concerns. So let's look at local in quantitative research, controlling location effects. So this slide introduces a critical shift in how local is treated in quantitative research. Unlike qualitative research, where context is embraced, quantitative research must carefully manage location as a potential threat to validity. This slide explains that relationships between variables may change depending on where data are collected, making location itself a possible confounding variable. In development and security research, this issue is especially pronounced. Communities differ in socioeconomic conditions, exposure to violence, institutional presence, or aid saturation. If these differences align with your independent variable, your results may reflect context rather than cause. The slide, therefore, emphasizes strategies such as standardizing conditions, documenting unavoidable differences, and statistically accounting for location effects. This is not about ignoring context. It's about preserving context from silently distorting casual claims. So while qualitative researchers lean into context, quantitative researchers must discipline it. This raises an important question. How exactly do these two paradigms differ in their treatment of locale? Let's make that contrast explicit. Qualitative and quantitative approaches to locale. This slide offers a clean side-by-side comparison of how qualitative and quantitative research approaches locale. Quantitative approaches emphasize standardization and control, while qualitative approaches emphasize thick description and meaning making within natural environments. What this comparison reveals is that neither approach is better. They simply serve different purposes. Quantitative research seeks to isolate relationships and make generalizable claims, which requires minimizing contextual noise, among others. Qualitative research seeks to understand lived realities, which requires capturing that very complexity. Problems arise when researchers mix these logics carelessly, trying to generalize from qualitative data or ignoring context threats in quantitative designs. Understanding this distinction helps prevent methodological confusion and reviewer criticism. With locale now firmly grounded across paradigms, we turn to the second foundational concept, the unit of the study. Unit of the study, what you are actually analyzing. This slide defines the unit of the study as the primary entity being analyzed, the what or who of the research. It lists down common units in development and security research, including beneficiaries, civilians, field workers, communities, NGOs, military units, documents, and even events like dialogues or security incidents. The key message here is clarity. Many methodological problems stem from fuzzy units collecting data from individuals but making claims about programs, or studying communities while analyzing individual level outcomes without adjustment. By explicitly naming the unit of the study, researchers establish the boundaries of their analyses and ensure coherence between research questions, data collection, and analysis strategies. Once you clearly define what you are analyzing, your methodological choices become more defensible. The next slide zooms in on how units are treated specifically in experimental and survey research. Let's look at units in experimental and survey research. So, uh, we need to explain that in experimental and survey research, the unit of study is typically the individual participant, such as beneficiaries, civilians, or security personnel. In experiments, individuals are randomly assigned to treatment and control groups, while survey sample individuals to make inferences about a broader population. The emphasis on random assignment in experiments is crucial at this point. It is what allows researchers to make causal claims by ensuring initial equivalence between groups. In development and security contexts, this might mean comparing villages receiving different interventions or personnel exposed to different training programs. Surveys, on the other hand, focus on representativeness, rather than manipulation, enabling researchers to describe patterns, perceptions, or outcomes across populations. These designs depend heavily on individual level units, but not all research aims for breadth or causality. To understand deep processes and even lived experience, researchers often turn to qualitative designs which treat units very differently. So, how do we understand units in qualitative research? This is where we look at depth over breadth. We need to highlight that qualitative research prioritizes depth rather than generalization. Units may include cases, programs, individuals with lived experience, or bounded systems such as specific intervention or community. In qualitative research, the unit is chosen not because it is typical or representative, but because it is illuminating. A single case can reveal dynamics that remain invisible in large datasets. For example, the experience of one displaced individual or the internal workings of one peace building initiative can generate insights into broader structural or social processes. The value lies in richness, not numbers. Understanding this helps researchers stop apologizing for small samples in qualitative work. With that in mind, the next slide shows how to clearly and convincingly write up your unit of the study. What your units of the study write up should include. There are three essential components of a strong unit of the study section: an explicit definition, clear inclusion boundaries, and methodological alignment with the research question and design. These components protect against ambiguity, explicitly stating the unit of the study is removes guesswork. Defining boundaries prevents scope creep, clarifying what is included and excluded. Methodological alignment shows intentionality. The unit is not arbitrary, but carefully selected because it allows the researcher to answer the research questions effectively. When units are clearly defined and justified, the rest of the methodology becomes easier to defend. Having completed this section, we now move to section 2, where attention shifts from what we study to who we include: sampling and sampling techniques. This section focuses on sampling strategies across research paradigms. It signals a transition from conceptual foundations to participant selections. Sampling is where methodological ideals meet practical constraints. In development and security research, access issues, safety concerns, and ethical considerations often shape who can be included. These acknowledges that reality, while still emphasizing rigor and transparency in sampling decisions. With sampling now center stage, the next slide clarifies that qualitative and quantitative research pursue fundamentally different sampling goals. Let's look at the fundamentally different sampling goals. So we contrast quantitative sampling goals, representation, and comparability, with qualitative goals, information-rich cases, and depth. It clearly explains that each paradigm samples for different reasons and evaluates success differently. Quantitative sampling aims to generalize and compare, often relying on sample selection, random selection, and adequate sample size. Qualitative sampling, by contrast, is purposeful and flexible, seeking participants who can provide deep insight into development challenges or security dynamics. Confusion arises when researchers try to apply quantitative standards like representativeness to qualitative designs where they don't simply apply. Recognizing these different goals prevents methodological misalignment. Now that we understand the logic of quantitative sampling, the next slide breaks it down into its core components, which we also need to pay attention to. Quantitative sampling core components. So we're still looking at this one in detail, huh? And this is very important as we move forward. So let's look at the quantitative sampling components. So we laid out a step-by-step structure for quantitative sampling, defining the population, selecting a sample, justifying sample size, and assigning groups in experimental designs. Each step addresses a specific validity concern. Defining the population clarifies generalizability. Sample selection affects bias. Sample size determines statistical power. So random assignment or matching supports causal inference. In development and security research, where field conditions are rarely ideal, being explicit about these steps demonstrates rigor even when compromises are necessary. At this point, we have a solid grasp of how quantitative sampling should be designed and justified. The next slides will walk us through how this logic unfolds operationally, moving from populations to samples to actual data collection in the field. Let's look at the survey research workflow from population to data. This slide visualizes the logical flow of survey research, moving from identifying the population to selecting a sample, administering the survey, and finally collecting data. It reinforces that survey research is not a single step, but a sequence of interconnected decisions. What's important here is the emphasis on order. Many methodological problems arise when researchers jump straight to writing survey questions without clearly defining the population or sampling frame. In development and security research, this can be especially problematic when populations are fluid, such as displaced communities or rotating security personnel. This workflow reminds us that rigor comes from respecting the sequence, clarity first, instruments later. By following this workflow, researchers reduce bias and confusion before data collection even begins. But surveys are only one design option. When researchers want to understand causes without manipulation, They often turn to casual comparative designs, which introduces new challenges. Random assignment in experimental designs. The slide explains random assignment as a defining feature of true experiments. It highlights a critical distinction. Random assignment affects internal validity, while random sampling affects external validity. This distinction is frequently misunderstood, especially by early researchers. In development and security research, you might not be able to randomly sample from a population, but you can still randomly assign participants to interventions. When random assignments is done correctly, it distributes pre-existing differences evenly across groups, allowing researchers to attribute outcome differences to interventions rather than to background characteristics or location-based factors. Random assignment is powerful, but often difficult or impossible in real-world settings. When that happens, researchers need alternative strategies to approximate equivalence. The next slide introduces one of the most common: matching. Matching as a control strategy. Matching is a method for creating comparable groups when random assignment is not feasible. It outlines a clear four-step process: identifying matching variables, measuring them, creating matched pairs or groups, and then randomly assigning within those matches. Matching is especially useful in development and security contexts where ethical, logistical, or political constraints limit randomization. For example, communities may already differ in vulnerability, exposure to violence, or access to aid. By matching on these variables, researchers reduce but do not eliminate selection bias. Importantly, matching requires careful thought about which variables truly matter for the outcome being studied. While matching strengthens causal inference, it cannot fully replicate the power of random assignment. This limitation becomes even more pronounced in causal comparative designs, which the next slide addresses directly. Causal comparative research design sampling cautions. The slide warns about the inherent vulnerabilities of causal comparative research, where researchers compare naturally occurring groups without manipulating variables. It highlights two major threats: subject characteristics and location differences. In development and research and security research, these threats are everywhere. Communities exposed to conflict may differ in countless ways from those that are not. Beneficiaries of one aid program may differ systematically from those in another. Without random assignment, researchers must be honest about these limitations and proactive in addressing them through measurement, statistical control, or cautious interpretation. Pretending these threats don't exist undermines credibility. The takeaway is not don't use causal comparative designs, but use them responsibly. That responsibility begins with a well structured sampling section, which the next slide explains in detail. So let's look at the structure of a quantitative sampling section. This slide, of course, outlines the recommended structure of a quantitative sampling section, from defining the population to addressing validity threats. It emphasizes logical progression and transparency. Each component answers a question reviewers are already asking. Who are you generalizing to? Where did your sample come from? How were participants selected and assigned? How did you ensure group equivalence? By explicitly addressing these points, researchers demonstrate methodological maturity in development and security research. This structure is especially valuable because field constraints often force compromises that need clear justifications. A clear structure, therefore, does not just improve readability, it signals rigor. One element of this structure demands special attention because of its impact on statistical conclusions, sample sizes. This slide explains why adequate sample size is critical for statistical power, the ability to detect real effects. It lists key factors influencing required sample size, such as effect size, power level, significance level, and analysis complexity. In development and security research, underpowered studies are a common and costly problem. Limited access, funding, or security constraints often tempt researchers to make do with small samples. This slide reinforces that sample size decisions should be driven by power analysis, not convenience. Even when constraints exist, researchers should demonstrate awareness of the trade-offs and interpret findings accordingly. Quantitative rigor depends not just on how data are collected, but on whether the study is capable of detecting meaningful effects at all. With quantitative sampling now fully unpacked, we now turn to a different logic of selection: qualitative sampling. Qualitative sampling, purposeful selection. Purposeful sampling is the foundation of qualitative research. It emphasizes selecting information-rich cases rather than statistically representative ones, with the goal of achieving transferability rather than generalizability. Qualitative researchers seek depth, insight into how people experience aid, conflict, or, for example, security interventions. Purposeful sampling allows researchers to select participants who are deeply embedded in these processes, such as community leaders, long-term beneficiaries, or experienced security personnel. The value of the data comes from richness, not numbers. Once we accept that qualitative sampling serves a different purpose, the next question becomes, how do we purposefully sample? Let's introduce common strategies. So, purposeful sampling strategies. So, there are several purposeful sampling strategies, including typical case, extreme or deviant case, maximum variation, snowball, and criterion sampling, each suited to different research goals. These strategies are tools, not rules. Typical cases help us understand the norm. Extreme cases reveal boundaries and hidden mechanisms. Maximum variation highlights patterns across diversity. Snowball sampling opens door to hidden or vulnerable populations, and criterion sampling ensures relevance. Skilled qualitative researchers select and justify strategies based on what they need to understand, not what is easiest to access. Purposeful sampling is about intentionality and insight. One particularly important role within this process, especially in ethnographic work, is the key informant, which the next slide tries to explore. So we need to make a point clear at this point, no? If it's quantitative research, it has to be randomized. If it's qualitative, it has to be non-random because it's purposive. Okay? Uh, but if it's going to be randomized, then it's going to be an issue of arriving at a acceptable sample size, which is not a question in qualitative research. So let's look at key informants in ethnographic research. So key informants are knowledgeable insiders who help researchers interpret cultural, organizational, or security contexts. It explains their role as providing insider perspectives, explaining meanings, and guiding researchers through complex environments. Key informants are not representatives of a community, they are interpreters. In development and security research, they help researchers avoid misinterpretation, navigate sensitive dynamics, and identify additional sources of insight. However, reliance on a single informant can introduce bias, which is why the slide emphasizes engaging multiple informants and building trust gradually. At this point, we've developed a strong understanding about quantitative and qualitative sampling logics. The next slides will show how to write qualitative sampling section that communicates this intentionality clearly and convincingly. Structure of a qualitative sampling section. We outline the core elements of a strong qualitative sampling section to include sampling logic, who or what will be sampled, the specific purposeful strategy, the role of key informants, and acknowledgement of emergent design. What stands out here is the emphasis on justification over numbers. Rather than listing a fixed sample size upfront, qualitative researchers are encouraged to explain why their participants are uniquely positioned to illuminate the phenomenon. In development and security research, where access may change due to political or security conditions, acknowledging flexibility is a strength, not a weakness. This structure helps reviewers see that sampling decisions are thoughtful, not ad hoc. A well-written qualitative sampling section tells a coherent story about insight, access, and relevance. Naturally, this raises a common question. If not power analysis, how do we think about sample size in qualitative research? Sample size in qualitative research. Depth, not numbers. Depth, not numbers. So we need to clarify that in qualitative research, we do not rely on statistical power. Instead, sampling continues until theoretical saturation, the point at which new data no longer produce new insights. We provide a practical guidance in relation to this, linking sample size to research design, than the rules of thumb. Phenomenological studies may involve a few, as 5 to 25 participants, while ethnographic work in communities or conflict zones may involve 30 to 50. What matters most is data richness, not scale. In development and security research, where deep engagements is often resource intensive, this perspective helps researchers justify smaller, more focused samples with confidence. With sampling logic now clear across the paradigms, the presentation can now move into the next major phase of the research design: data collection, how evidence is actually gathered in the field. So, this is the third section, and it signals a shift from who is studied to how information is gathered. It frames data collection as systematic, intentional, and aligned with the chosen research paradigm. In development and security research, data collection is often the most visible and risky phase of a study. Choices made here affect data quality, participant safety, and ethical integrity. So, we build this section on earlier discussions about local and the rest. So, uh, here, no, we need to pay attention with this chapter or section context set. We now begin with quantitative data collection, emphasizing consistency and control as cornerstones of rigor. Quantitative data collection, standardized procedures. We need to explain that quantitative data collection prioritizes standardization, objectivity, and consistency. The goal is to minimize measurement error, so observed differences reflect real variation rather than procedural inconsistencies. In development and security contexts, achieving standardization can be challenging. Researchers may work across multiple communities, languages, or security environments. This slide underscores the importance of validated instruments, consistent administration, and objective scoring. Without these safeguards, even well-sampled studies can produce unreliable and misleading results. So standardization protects internal validity, but how data are collected also matters. Surveys in particular can be administered in many ways, each with trade-offs. Let's explore these next. Survey administration methods, options, and trade-offs. So we need to compare four survey administration methods: mail, telephone, personal interview, and web-based surveys, highlighting their advantages and limitations. The key lesson here is contextual fit. Mail surveys may fail in areas with limited postal systems or literacy. Telephone surveys require network access and trust. Personal interviews offer rich data but pose cost and security risks. Web-based surveys are efficient but exclude populations without internet access. Good researchers choose methods based not on convenience but on feasibility, ethics, and data quality within a specific locale. Survey mode is a strategic decision, not a technical afterthought. Beyond surveys, some quantitative designs involve comparing naturally occurring groups, a process with its own data collection challenges, which we shall try to address next. Causal comparative data collection process. This slide outlines the basic process of causal comparative research: identifying groups, measuring outcomes, and statistically comparing them. It emphasizes that researchers cannot manipulate group membership. Because random assignment is absent, careful measurement becomes the primary defense against invalid conclusions. In development and security research, this means collecting detailed data on potential confounding variables such as socioeconomic status, exposure to violence, or prior program participation. Without this information, observed differences risk being misattributed. Causal comparative designs demand humility and transparency. When experiments are possible, however, another challenge emerges: ensuring the intervention itself is implemented correctly. The next slide addresses these issues of treatment fidelity. Let's look at treatment fidelity in experimental research. This slide defines treatment fidelity as implementing an intervention exactly as intended. It outlines four components here: clear specification, training, monitor, and feedback. In development and security research, interventions often involve multiple actors: NGO staff, community leaders, security personnel across complex environments even. Without fidelity, researchers cannot confidently link outcomes to the intervention because the treatment may vary across sites. Monitoring and feedback are therefore not bureaucratic tasks, they are essential to causal inference. High quality experiments require not only good design, but disciplined interventions. The next slide shows how to communicate these decisions clearly in a quantitative data collection section. Writing your quantitative data collection section. We need to explain what a strong quantitative data collection section should include. And that includes, as you can see, instruments and administration mode, standardization steps, and fidelity monitoring for experimental design. The focus here is anticipation. Reviewers want to see that researchers have thought ahead about threats to validity and logical challenges. In development and security research, explicitly addressing issues like multi-site standardization, training of data collectors, and adaptation to field conditions demonstrates professionalism and preparedness. A well-written section reassures readers that data collection will be rigorous and consistent. But quantitative methods are only part of the story. The next shifts gears to qualitative data collection, where flexibility and triangulation take center stage. And therefore, something that we want to pay attention to also. Okay? So let's look at qualitative data collection, multiple sources in natural setting. So the slide introduces qualitative data collection as multi-source and context-driven. It highlights observations, interviews, documents, and audiovisual materials as complementary sources of evidence. Rather than standardization, qualitative rigor comes from triangulation, corroborating insights across different sources. In development and security research, no single source captures the full picture. Observations show behavior, interviews reveal meaning, and documents provide historical and institutional context. Together, they create a richer, more credible understanding of complex environments. At this stage, we see that qualitative data collection is about depth through diversity of evidence. The next slides will dive deeper into each of these methods, starting with observation in the field. Observation in qualitative research. We introduce observation as a core qualitative data collection method. Observation allows researchers to gather first-hand information about behaviors, interactions, and environments as they naturally occur, rather than relying solely on participant self-reports. In development and security research, observation is especially valuable because what people do often differs from what they say they do. Observing aid distributions, community meetings, or security checkpoints reveals routines, power relations, and unspoken norms. Unlike structured quantitative observations, qualitative observation remains open and adaptive, allowing researchers to follow emerging patterns and unexpected events that may be central to understanding local dynamics. Observation grounds qualitative research in lived reality, but how researchers position themselves while observing also matters. Here we explore the different roles a researcher can take in the field. So let's look at the researcher roles in observation. So there's a continuum of observer roles ranging from complete observer to complete participant. Each role balances engagement, access, and ethical considerations differently. Most development and security researchers operate as observers as participants, present and engaged, but primarily focused on observation. More immersive roles, such as participant as observer, can deepen insight but may blur boundaries and raise ethical concerns, especially in sensitive or high risk environments. The key is not choosing the best role, but selecting one that aligns with research questions, ethics, and safety constraints. Once researchers decide how they will observe, they must document what they see systemically. That documentation takes the form of field notes, which we shall consider next. Field notes, capturing what you observe. We need to explain field notes as the primary written record of observational data. It distinguishes between descriptive notes, which record what happened, and reflective notes, which capture the researcher's interpretation and reflections. Field notes are not casual journaling, they are data. In development and security research, where settings may change rapidly, precise documentation of time, date, location, and participants are critical. Separating descriptions from reflection helps maintain analytic clarity, allowing researchers to later trace how interpretations developed while preserving the integrity of observed events. With observations and documentation in place, qualitative researchers often turn to another powerful method for accessing meaning directly. And what's that? Interviews. Interviews. Interviews in qualitative research. We need to highlight interview also as a central method for understanding perspectives, experiences, and meanings that cannot be directly observed. It emphasizes open-ended questioning and contextual sensitivity. In development and security context, interviews allow participants to explain how they interpret aid, conflict, or security interventions. Building rapport is especially important when topics are sensitive or when power asymmetries exist. Listening carefully, following leads, and documenting nonverbal cues all contribute to richer, more trustworthy data. Interviews vary in structure and flexibility. We break down the main types of qualitative interviews and when each is most useful. Types of qualitative interviews. We differentiate between structured, semi-structured, and unstructured interviews, outlining the strengths and limitations of each. Semi-structured interviews are the most common in development security research because they balance consistency with flexibility. Structured interviews are useful when comparing many participants on the same issues, while unstructured interviews are valuable in exploratory or highly sensitive contexts. Choosing the right format depends on how much is already known and how much openness is needed to capture unexpected insights. While individual interviews provide depth, some research questions benefit from observing how perspectives emerge collectively. The next slide introduces focus group discussions as a method for capturing group dynamics. Focus group. This slide explains focus group as group interviews designed to explore shared norms, collective views, and social interaction among participants. Focus groups can reveal how opinions are shaped through discussion, such as community attitudes towards aid programs or security interventions. However, they require skilled facilitation to manage power dynamics and ensure that quieter voices are heard. Focus group trade individual depth for insight into social processes. Beyond spoken data, qualitative researchers also analyze materials that exist independently of the research process. The next slide will also explore documents and content analysis. Document and content analysis. We introduce documents and audiovisual materials as valuable qualitative data sources, including reports, policy documents, photographs, videos, and digital media. In development and security research, documents often reveal organizational priorities, official narratives, and historical context that interviews alone cannot capture. Analyzing both written and visual materials allows researchers to compare formal accounts with observed practices and participant experiences, strengthening interpretive depth. Having documents is only the first step. Systematic analysis is required to extract meaning, and that's what we will do next in the content analysis process. This slide, bear with me. I know you're also tired already listening to my voice, but bear with me. This slide presents a step-by-step process for content analysis, defining questions, selecting content, developing categories, coding materials, and interpreting patterns. Content analysis brings structure to qualitative interpretation. In development and security research, it allows systematic comparison across reports, policies, or operational documents. By coding themes consistently, researchers can identify patterns that reveal how issues like community engagement, security priorities, or aid effectiveness are framed across contexts and organizations. Even with careful analysis, no single method tells the whole story. To strengthen credibility, qualitative researchers combine multiple sources, a strategy known as triangulation, which the slide introduces next. Triangulation and multiple data sources. This slide explains triangulation as the use of multiple data sources or methods to corroborate findings. It illustrates how observations, interviews, and documents complement one another. Triangulation is especially vital in complex development and security environments where partial or biased perspectives are common. When different sources converge on the same conclusion, confidence in the findings increases. Discrepancies, meanwhile, prompt deeper inquiry rather than dismissal, often leading to more nuanced understanding. At this point, we have a complete picture of qualitative data collection and validation. The next slides will show how to write a qualitative data collection section that communicates this rigor clearly and hopefully persuasively. Writing your qualitative data collection section. This slide explains what a strong qualitative data collection section should contain, specifying multiple data sources, capturing context, and clearly describing interviews formats and documentation procedures. The emphasis here is credibility. Reviewers and readers want to see that qualitative data collection is systematic, not impressionistic. By explicitly naming data sources and explaining how triangulation strengthens findings, researchers demonstrate rigor, detailing how context is captured through field notes, artifacts, or photographs, signals sensitivity to local. Clear interview procedures reassure readers that the data were gathered ethically and consistently. At this point, the presentation has shown how to design and document both quantitative and qualitative methods. The next section moves from theory into practice, showing how all these elements come together in an actual research proposal. Practical applications. This section focuses on translating methodological concepts into concrete proposal components. It marks a shift from explanation to application. This transition is crucial for graduate students. Understanding methodology is one thing, applying it under real constraints is another. Development and security research often involves tight timelines, and ethical requirements and field limitations are needed. This section shows how to integrate rigor and practicality without losing methodological coherence. With application now front and center, we now offer a reusable structure that can anchor almost any research proposal. A reusable one-page structure proposal. This slide presents a concise one-page template organizing four core components: local, unit of the study, sampling plan, and data collection methods. The power of this structure lies in alignment. Each section builds logically on the previous one, ensuring that research questions, methods, and analysis stays connected. For development security research, this structure also forces early considerations of access, security risks, and contextual constraints, issues that can derail poorly planned studies. This template provides a practical anchor for proposal writing. The next slide demonstrates how it works in practice, starting with quantitative examples. Quantitative examples in community health interventions. So this slide presents a concrete example of quantitative experimental study, clearly specifying the local and unit of the study within rural communities affected by disease. What makes this example strong is its attention to equivalence and context. The communities are selected because they share key characteristics, minimizing confounding location effects. The unit of the study, individual adults at risk, high risk, is clearly defined and directly linked to the intervention and outcome measures. This alignment strengthens causal inference and proposal credibility. With local and unit clearly established, the next slide completes the example by showing how sampling and data collection are handled. So let's look at sampling plan and data collection here. This slide details the sampling plan and data collection procedures for the experimental study, including population definition, random selection, random assignment, standardized instruments, and fidelity monitoring. This example demonstrates best practices under real-world conditions. Random assignment ensures group equivalence, while standardized surveys and observations support internal validity. The inclusion of baseline and endline data collection shows temporal rigor, and fidelity monitoring ensures the intervention is delivered as designed. Critical in development and security interventions involving multiple sections or actors. Having seen how quantitative methods come together in practice, the presentation now turns to qualitative examples that emphasizes depth and contextual understanding. This slide introduces a qualitative ethnographic study conducted within an NGO office implementing a participatory development model. The local and unit of the study are clearly specified. This example illustrates how qualitative research leverages context rather than controls it. The NGO office is chosen precisely because it is undergoing organizational change. The unit of the study, the outreach team as a collaborative unit, reflects the research goal of understanding interaction and processes, not individual outcomes. This clarity helps understand qualitative depth over breadth. With the qualitative context and unit defined, the next slide shows how purposeful sampling and multi-source data collection are applied in practice. Let's look at slide 49. So, this slide details the qualitative sampling plan and data collection methodologies, including criterion sampling, key informants, participant observation, interview, document analysis, and photographs. The strength of this example lies in triangulation. Multiple data sources allow the researchers to examine coordination processes from different and from multiple angles. What people do, what they say, what documents reveal. So, the use of experienced staff as information-rich cases and the identification of a key informant demonstrate purposeful, theory-driven sampling. Together, these examples show how methodological principles translate into real research designs. The next step leads us back again to common mistakes that can undermine otherwise very solid proposals. And let's begin with the first one, common mistakes. So the slide identifies frequent errors related to vague location descriptions, ignoring context threats, unclear units of analysis, and mismatches between units and analysis. These mistakes often stem from rushing or assuming shared understanding. In development and security research, vagueness is especially damaging because context and scale matter to us. Analyzing individual data while claiming community level effects or ignoring how insecurity shapes responses weakens both validity and trustworthiness. This slide serves as a practical reflection checklist for self-review. At this point, the presentation has equipped us with tools and cautions. The remaining slides will consolidate these lessons, address additional common pitfalls, and ultimately return to the bigger picture, how to design research that is rigorous, ethical, and impactful. Another common mistake to avoid has something to do with sampling. This slide highlights frequent quantitative and qualitative sampling errors, such as confusing random sampling with random assignment, failing to justify sample size, relying on convenient sampling without acknowledgement, and misunderstanding qualitative sampling logic. These mistakes often arise from applying the wrong standards to the wrong paradigm. Quantitative errors weaken generalizability and causal inference, while qualitative errors undermine depth and credibility. In development and security research, where access constraints are common, the real issue is not imperfection, but failing to be transparent and intentional about limitations. Sampling mistakes are often preventable with careful planning and honest reporting. The next slide turns to another vulnerable stage of research design, data collection. common mistakes to avoid in data collection. So the slide identifies data collection pitfalls, including inconsistent quantitative procedures across sites, lack of instrument validation for context, reliance on a single qualitative data source, and insufficient field documentation. In development and security settings, inconsistencies and poor documentation can quietly erode data quality. Using instruments not validated for local context can distort findings, while single perspective qualitative data misses complexity. This slide reinforces that rigor is not about perfection, it's about disciplined attention to process and documentation. Avoiding these errors strengthens both validity and trustworthiness. To help researchers self-assess, the next slide offers a comprehensive checklist. Let's check the comprehensive checklist. Have you addressed these key elements? So we provide you with a practical checklist covering operational environment, unit of analysis, sampling, and data collection. Checklists may seem simple, but they are powerful tools for quality assurance. This one encourages researchers to verify alignment across design components and anticipate reviewer concerns. In complex environments and security research, such systematic self-review can prevent costly redesigns later. With design details checked, the presentation now zooms out to address a higher level concern: alignment between methodology and research paradigms. We need to contrast quantitative and qualitative paradigms, emphasizing that each rests on different assumptions about reality, knowledge, and evidence. Misalignment is a subtle but serious problem. Apologizing for small qualitative sample or mixing paradigms without justification confuses readers and weakens arguments. In development and security, clarity about paradigm ensures that methods, analyses, and claims all speak the same language. Strong research is coherent from assumption to conclusions. Even with coherence, however, researchers sometimes need guidance. So let's address when and why to seek methodological consultation. So this slide normalizes seeking help, listing situations where consultation is appropriate, such as design uncertainty, instrumentation selection, power analysis, mixed method integration, or ethical review challenges. Methodological consultation is framed here as professional responsibility, not weakness. In development and research and security research, stakes are high and contexts are complex. Consulting experts early can prevent ethical missteps, designing flaws, or misinterpretation of results, saving time and protecting communities. Sound advice strengthens research, but even the best designed study must adapt once it enters the field. So, moving from planning to implementation. So, we need to emphasize piloting, relationship building, documentation, and flexibility during implementation. Field realities rarely unfold exactly as planned. Piloting reveals hidden problems even. Relationships enables access and trust. Documentation creates an audit trail. Flexibility allows adaptation without losing integrity. responsiveness in these cases is a methodological skill. Implementation is where design meets reality. Throughout this process, ethical considerations must remain central. Which is the next slide of this presentation. This slide outlines ethical principles: informed consent, confidentiality, beneficence, and justice applied across all stages of research. In development and security contexts, ethics go beyond compliance. Participants may face real risks for speaking honestly, and researchers must anticipate harm, protect identities, and distribute benefits fairly. Ethical reflexivity is not a final step. It is a continuous responsibility. Ethical research earns trust and legitimacy. To continue growing as researchers, we also need strong intellectual foundations. The next slide points to resources for continued learning, and we just listed it down here. But let's focus more on the key takeaways. The slide summarizes core lessons. Local matters. Units must be clear. Sampling must match purpose. Data collection must be rigorous, and quality must be addressed explicitly. These key takeaways reinforce a central message. Strong research is intentional and aligned. In development and security studies, where findings influence policy and lives, methodological rigor is a moral as well as scholarly obligation. With these principles in mind, the final step looks like inviting researchers to apply what they've learned. So let's look at the last slide. And I know that you are already tired just like me. But hold on. Here we see concrete action steps: reviewing research questions, drafting methodology sections, checking against common mistakes, seeking feedback, and piloting instruments. The emphasis here is momentum. Research design improves through iteration, reflection, and even dialogue. By treating methodology as a living framework rather than as a static requirement, research position themselves for meaningful, impactful work. Yes. We're done. As we close this lecture, remember, methodology is not just a technical exercise. It is an ethical stance and a statement of care. The choices you make about local units, sampling, and data collection determine whose voices are heard, whose realities are visible, and whose futures are shaped by evidence. In development and security research, rigor is an act of respect. Clarity is an act of justice. And thoughtful design is an act of hope. Hope that knowledge, carefully gathered and humbly interpreted, can contribute to safer communities, fairer systems, and more humane policies. Carry these principles with you in your proposal, your fieldwork, and your careers. The world you study is complex, but your commitment to doing research well can make a real difference. Thank you for listening.